That is exactly it. All right. Hey, you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and you're listening to whomever, or wherever you are. You're listening to a new episode, brand new shampoo, or perhaps it's old. Maybe you're listening to it. Maybe you binge listen, and this is a very old episode. It's the That Chapter podcast. It's me, Big Mike, joined by Dirty Keith,
Heyo.
as always. And today we are talking real crime-arinos,
Yeah,
Keith.
we're back to crime. We did a couple of spooky episodes.
We have, that's what I like about the podcast is we're kind of covering all our bases.
Yeah.
Sometimes we got cryptids. Oh, that's actually an episode we have to do soon.
Oh yeah, write that down.
Right at 10. Live on the podcast. We're planning out our content. That one, we have, we've got some other spooky tales coming up. We recently talked about the Highgate Vampire, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That was actually one of my favorite episodes that we've done recently. But then, we also got serial killers. It's a little bit, you never know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
Folks at home,
Fingers and many pies.
they wake up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on a Monday morning, constantly refreshing their favorite podcast feed to try and find the latest episode of that podcast, and they're thinking, what's it going to be about today? Other podcasts, you know what it's going to be about, baby. With us, you never know. We keep you on your toes.
Most weeks we don't even know.
That is very, very true. In fact, it's pretty much kind of random. But let's stick on topic today, Keith. Your big, beautiful eyes are distracting me. Today, what are we talking about? Well, actually, no, before we even get into that.
Okay.
We have to do housekeeping as always.
Yep.
Folks, check out That Chapter podcast, subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcast apps. We're on them all. You got your Apple Podcasts, your Spotify. There are others. We're on that too. And check us out on YouTube too for some extra special spicy video content. But, one, actually, I have to go through is my Mike's movie reviews.
Which, by the way,
Yes.
I've been really enjoying. One of your reviews was Longlegs, and you said it was very good.
I enjoyed Longlegs a lot, yes.
And I watched it. I loved it.
You did?
It was
Yeah, it's good.
amazing. Really, really, really good. I know exactly what you were saying. I was looking up reviews, but I've actually been obsessed with it. I've watched it twice through now. I watched it the full way through, and then I keep on going back and watching sections of it again and again and again. And then I've watched like loads of videos, like kind of breaking it apart.
Right.
I've looked up so much about like people like writing essays on it and stuff.
There's probably a lot of video essays on YouTube, I imagine, people talking about it.
Yeah, all like the hidden things you might miss. And I know you mentioned before, there's like you might see in the background like the devil or whatever.
The devil you see multiple times. Kind of.
So I noticed it, I don't know, like 4 times, and then looked up to, I think it appears like 10 times. So I had to go back again, look out for it.
Another
again,
reason to watch it.
Fantastic.
Well, there you go, folks at home. I gave it 2 thumbs up. Keith gives it 3 thumbs up.
3 thumbs up. Yeah,
It's his favorite movie of all time. You just said.
I think it's definitely the best horror movie I've seen since The Witch.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, like,
I'm gonna hold that thought. I won't commit. But I thought it was
my
very
opinion.
good.
I don't know what you're giving opinion.
No,
my
Keith,
opinion.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with your opinion and therefore say your opinion is wrong. You agree with me. That's how this works. That's a strong opinion. I don't know if I'd agree with it, but hey, listen, it's a free country.
There we go. Yeah.
For now.
For now. Yeah.
Not if I have my way, it won't be. But for now, you are legally allowed to have your own opinion, which I protest.
Okay.
What else did you watch?
I also watched that other one, Trap.
Oh, the M. Night Shyamalan movie. Yeah, it's all right.
I really enjoyed it. It did fall apart at the end for me. It fell apart. I don't think it...
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I actually dislike it. I'd probably even give it a better review than it warranted. I just think the premise was really good.
It was really clever. It was really smart. I really enjoyed it. It was literally the last, I'd say, 15, 20-ish minutes where, for me, it's just started falling apart.
Yeah. I think that's the thing with a lot of M. Night Shyamalan's movies. The premise is good. The execution... not so good.
Yeah.
Also, the singer, like, I don't like to throw somebody under the bus, but she was not very good.
It's actually, I think that's M. Night Shyamalan's daughter.
Oh, really? I mean, if you're... Nepo babies are often talked about in society these days. Can you just make sure, if you're going to be a Nepo baby, can you just make sure they're talented? Because I thought, like, her singing wasn't bad, but her acting was not very good. Like, it took me out of the movie.
Yeah, let me just double check. Actually, that is correct.
That the singer who's in Trap.
Oh, yeah.
His
daughter? She is the daughter of director M. Night Shyamalan. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That wasn't a dream.
Listen, not every one of your children is an amazing angel. Some of them are not that talented. But you know what? It's a fine movie. I thought Josh Hartnett was quite good in it.
I would recommend it, but I wouldn't watch it again.
I would recommend it if you had nothing better to do. And it's like, maybe stick it on if you're like hungover on the couch or something like that. You're just going to want to watch something. But did you watch any of the other movies I recommended?
No, they don't know.
Okay, Kia, thumbs down. Apologies to all the other filmmakers of those other movies. You know what? Since we last spoke on Mike's my classic years-long review section, I actually haven't watched any. I did remember two things that I watched a long time ago. One was a movie called Haunt on Netflix.
Okay, yeah.
Have you seen that?
No.
It's again kind of like these people go to one of those haunt houses at Halloween and shit goes down. Again, it's like not bad.
Okay.
Not great, not bad.
Yeah.
I thought that the other one I watched, Hell House, was better, but this was still kind of interesting.
Okay, where are we with the thumbs up? Flaccid, semi, erect?
I'd say just nice little chub.
A nice little chubby thumbs up. Got it.
Yeah, that's about it. Again, it's like if you're in the mood for Halloween, watch it, but I wouldn't like run out the door. And that's it. Mike's ending theme tune. Do. Okay. Keith, now it's time for your long-running segment of My House is Haunted.
Nothing to report, unfortunately.
Damn.
I know. And I'm always raging. That's the thing. Like, it's not my fault. It's the ghost's fault.
Yeah.
Let's blame him. He's done feck all throughout the week. So.
Yeah. Well, in fairness, the last thing that happened was finding blood in your bathroom. So
that's
weird. Kind of a biggie.
Yeah, so I can't explain that. That hasn't happened again, thankfully, because that
is weird. Yeah. That's definitely the strongest sign of paranormal activity.
But I don't even know if that's paranormal. That's just weird and unexplainable.
Yeah, it's actually quite gross and disturbing.
Yeah. It's more kind of like, oh my God, is there someone in my house? Very strange.
Yeah, well, speaking of very strange, let's get into today's episode. So this old story takes place in the year of 1986 in North Carolina when a soldier no less, went on trial for a gruesome crime. An entire family slain. However, nice. It turned out he was innocent, according to the jury, because this guy, an army sergeant, he was laughing all the way home. Or...
was he?
Nice. Yes, very good. Because people still have questions to this day. They still had questions when this made the news when it originally happened. And then again, many years later in 2010. This is a saga, folks at home. This is a long-running saga. So, get the kettle on.
The story that just keeps giving.
It is a story that keeps giving. So let's give it a go. The setting for this episode is Fayetteville, North Carolina, home of Fort Bragg. Fitting because this case revolves around the military and their families. So, before there was Craigslist and Facebook and all that stuff to sell your old shite, there was the good old-fashioned classified sections in newspapers, the ones that we pretty much use these days for obituaries. But in the 1980s, people would post in these classified sections ads for help wanted, seeking companionship, and also buy, sell, trade, that sort of thing. No tire kickers, please.
Already I'm off to a quick little tangent, but
I'm excited.
I have a funny little story about obituaries.
Better be funny.
So in school, we won a competition to write and produce a 15-minute radio show that would go live on air. A pretty big radio show. I won't call it out, but it's pretty big. But so we had a lot of fun with the script, but we thought it'd be really funny to add a obituary section. And our correspondent or on-the-scene reporter, we decided to call him Necro Phil.
Ah, that's good.
Which, as like teenage boys, we thought this was hilarious.
It's the real knee slappers galore.
Yeah, no, like when we wrote it, we were like, there's no way they're going to greenlight this and they're going to tell us to change it. And then they said it was fine. And they let us continue it. We did our bit on radio.
Wow.
With Necro Phil.
And nobody copped it. Or they did realize they just didn't care.
Well, the producer who was going through it and was reading it, he was like, that's pretty funny. He let us run with it. It was like, okay, great. When you said obituaries, it reminded me of that.
That is pretty good. That is pretty good. I like it a lot. Top marks. That's 2 thumbs up.
I should see if I can find that, actually. I think I have it on CD.
Oh, man, if you can find that.
I might have it on CD somewhere in the house. I'll have a look. In my family house.
Folks,
I'll have a look.
start your engines. So, speaking of these buy and sell magazines, it's well known, in recent years that online activity meetups, the newfangled buy and sell trades, whatever, they come with their own risks. I mean, over the years, you've heard countless stories of Tinder dates, online relationships, all that stuff gone bad. Craigslist personnel, people dead in suitcases, the yada yada. There's like multiple Craigslist killers out there. I know 2 off the head. There's Philip Markov in Boston, Craigslist killer, Richard Beasley in, I actually can't remember where he was. He would lure people off Craigslist and kill them.
One of America's first serial killers, H.H. Holmes. He used classified ads as well.
Right, to get lure people in. Yeah, that's exactly it. Amazingly, the classifieds, they came with a similar risk, as you just heard. Who could have known, though, that meeting random people would lead to bad shit? And in 1985, it was real bad shit. So the date of our story was May 10th, 1985, and Jeanette, who lived on Summerhill Road in Fayetteville, she became concerned about her neighbours, the Eastburns, at 367 Summerhill Road, when she heard their baby crying just non-stop. For an 18-month-old, the odd crying was normal, but it was the next day after this continuous crying, when Jeanette, she could still hear her, but something felt very off. The house, the Eastburns' house, it was completely dark. Newspapers were piling up on the front door, uncollected for days. That's very creepy. Completely pitch dark house, looks almost abandoned, and you can just hear a baby crying from it, coming from the inside.
Yeah, horrifying. It's one of those times I'm actually glad for a nosy neighbour. Yeah, taking note of all this stuff.
Yeah,
like something's weird here.
The mother, Catherine Eastburn, her car still parked in the driveway. It was very, very eerie. There had been zero movement for days. Jeanette finally called the police on May 12th, and that was when they came. They knocked on the door, no answer, and then they began to hear the baby crying. They made their way into the house, and they came out with a baby Jana. She had dried tears and dirt on her face, a full diaper, she was hungry, dangerously dehydrated, but alongside the baby in this house, they also discovered the decomposing bodies of her mother, Catherine, 32 years old, and sisters, Cara, 5, and Erin, 3. Who were the victims, the Eastburns, and what had happened on the days leading up to this? Catherine and Gary Eastburn met in 1970, and after dating for 5 years, they got married. It was in 1979, 4 years after their marriage, they had a daughter, Cara. Then in 1982, Erin, and finally in 1983, a third daughter, Jana. Catherine Eastburn was living the single mom life while her husband and the father of her children, Gary, he was away for training for 10 weeks in Alabama with the Air Force. While Gary was away, Catherine was busy getting the house in order and ready for their upcoming relocation from Fayetteville, North Carolina, to England, where Gary was now to be posted with the US Air Force. Being a military wife, this was nothing new for Catherine. In fact, the real thing she was concerned about was their dog, Dixie. It was an elderly dog, an English setter. She was getting up there in years, and, well, the Eastburn family didn't think it was really fair to uproot Dixie and relocate her at such an elderly age in dog years. The trip alone, that'd be hard enough on the dog, they believed. So that was when Catherine turned to the local newspaper, the Beeline Grab Bag, and put out an ad to rehome Dixie the dog. It was then, on May 7th, 1985, that Catherine got an inquiry about the dog, and the same day, the dog was picked up from the Eastburn family home by a man, Timothy Hennis. Then, on May 11th, 1985, Gary Eastburn got a call from his wife like they had done, every Saturday morning for years. No matter where he'd be based, every Saturday he would have a good old chat with his wife, Catherine. This was a ritual they had established, and, it was important to their old marriage, as you would say. So much travel and so much distance between them, it was important to keep this little ritual ongoing. It was like their little date.
Yeah, nice date morning Saturday.
Yeah, there you go. This time, however, though, when Gary called, Catherine didn't answer the phone. Now, Gary, at this point, he had a bad feeling. This was their ritual, and she was always there. She would have let him know, and if for some reason she wasn't answering.
And this was Mother's Day weekend as well. So, a pretty big weekend.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Big deal, Rooney. But there was, nothing that he could really do at that point without it seeming like an overreaction to a simple unanswered phone call. But when she didn't get back to him, he called the police himself to ask them to go check on his family, do a welfare check. And in fact, a deputy did go to the house, but when the deputy got no answer, simply left a little note for Catherine to call her husband who was in Alabama. There was no record or indication that the deputy heard any baby crying from inside the house at that time. Neighbor Jeanette, though, had already heard the baby crying. It simply sounded like, the baby had been crying, and when the deputy arrived, that was like the baby just stopped crying for like a little bit. Probably had cried itself to sleep. The deputy then arrives, hears nothing, leaves, the baby starts crying again.
Yeah.
It's really, really tragic.
It was really sad.
And it was, the next day when the police would return with now, both Gary calling from Alabama, getting really worried, and then Jeanette, the neighbors, calling the police. That was when they found Catherine and 2 of her daughters brutally murdered inside their very own home. Once police arrived, it went quickly from welfare check to homicide investigation. One of the first responding officers broke a window, and that's how he was able to gain access to inside the house. He quickly grabbed Jana from her crib, said he smelled something awful from inside, and that's when he went back in. That was when they discovered Catherine Eastburn. The 32-year-old mother was found on the floor beside her bed. Her bra lifted up to her chin, her pants removed, and her underwear had been cut off. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed 15 times. Kara, just 5 freaking years old, was found under a Star Wars blanket, having been stabbed 5 times. And the youngest, just 3 years old, had blunt force trauma to her chest and back. And all 3 victims had their throats slit. A really horrific crime, the worst monster imagiable.
Yeah,
is the only.
I can't imagine having to walk into that scene. It must have been absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
It really, at this point, it seems like it's absolute monster. He was obviously after the wife, just with the sexual assault and stuff.
Yeah.
Didn't want to leave any witnesses.
Yeah.
The 2 young girls, was it 5 and 3? That would have been old enough to identify him. Mm-hmm. And then was like, oh, the baby won't be able to identify me, so I'm not going to bother. And said, I'll leave it to rot. It's it's horrifying.
Yeah, it's a really horror. It's speechless, I think is the only way I can describe it. Upon investigation, police found no forced entry to the home. DNA was found under Catherine's fingernails, and there was semen, fingerprints, and footprints, and a lame attempt at blood cleanup, and $300 was missing along with Catherine's bank card and PIN number, so they did find evidence, though no forced entry. Police then had the horrifying job of calling Gary back, who was expecting to hear his wife's voice on the other line. However, instead he heard the worst news possible about what had happened to his family. So, the investigation into who had done this, the monster that had done this, it began. Witnesses questioned, sketches done of who was in the area, the 9th of May, the early hours of the 10th of May, when it's believed the murders were actually committed.
There's a CNN documentary about this, and it includes a pretty funny scene in it. So when the incident happened, people in the community, they were obviously in shock at what happened. This is a very close-knit military family community, and everyone was just trying to make sense of what happened. So a camera crew was sent to report on the situation, and they asked people, do you have any idea who did it? And there's one woman in the documentary, and she started getting some strange phone calls. And then suddenly another woman pulled up from behind her in a car and just started shouting from the window. It was like, Julie, don't you be giving out any ideas who did it. Yeah. It's just they start shouting at each other. And it's just the second one was basically, stop your gossiping.
Well, on live news.
Yeah.
So let's move on to another soldier. One of the last people to visit the Eastburn house. The man who collected Dixie the elderly dog. Timothy Bailey Hennis was born February 24th, 1958, and he was a sergeant in the US military in Fort Bragg. He grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, and graduated from high school in 1976. At the time of the murders, Timothy was just the ripe old age of 27 years old. Himself and the wife, Angela, had just had their first child, a daughter named Kristen. She was only 10 weeks old. Tim, he worked at the time as a parachuter fixer-upper, basically the guy who packs parachutes for the airborne. So anyway, him and the old wife had a dog currently, a Spitz, but they wanted a second dog to complete their little family. Hey, every dog needs a buddy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so they wanted one that was already good with their kids, as they had a young daughter who's only 10 weeks old. And that's what he told Catherine when he went and collected Dixie the dog from the Eastburn family home on May 7th. It was then, on May 9th, apparently Timothy and Catherine had one last conversation, and that was over the telephone. It was basically Tim and Catherine saying, oh, how's Dixie getting on? Is she settling in with her new family? She had this dog for many, many years, wanted to make sure that her old dog was settling in with the new family. Later on that day, Timothy said he drove his wife and daughter to his in-laws. He didn't stay, but went directly back home, aside from a quick stop for fuel. Not a great alibi, no one was obviously able to corroborate this, and CCTV wasn't really quite a thing at the time, but let's go with it, for now, let's say. So, back to the murders. Timothy and his wife had been watching the news when they saw the story about Catherine and her girls. It was also reported that witnesses remembered seeing a white Chevy outside the house in the early morning hours, matching Timothy's car. And witnesses also provided a description of a male, blonde, wearing a members-only jacket outside the Eastburns' home. Tim, watching the news, basically had an oh shit moment. They showed a composite sketch on the TV, and he was like looking in a mirror.
It's pretty spot on, in fairness.
Yeah, he was like, that's my car. Yeah. That sounds like me, a blonde guy, members-only jacket, the composite sketch. And he was thinking to himself, well, I don't have a good alibi.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I left my family at the in-laws, and then I went and I was alone. He was shitting himself, basically, at this time.
His wife seen it as well. The two of them were watching TV at the time, and she was looking at it as well.
She's like, isn't
"Hey,
that you?
That looks like you."
This is the house where 3 people were brutally murdered, and you were just at that house, like,
Getting the
2
dog.
days before
Yeah.
getting the dog. Yeah, exactly. So, seeing this, knowing he had been with them shortly before the murders, the car, the sketch, Tim immediately drove to the police station to, well, clear his name. He swore he simply bought the dog and that was that. Coming forward was an act of good faith. And I mean, I think most people would probably agree with that. They were like, that's not me. I want to make sure you do not think that is me. I will go to the police myself.
Yeah, I want you on the right track instead of look for me, eventually finding me, and then realizing you went down the wrong path.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's like, what can I do to clear my name as soon as I possibly can?
yeah.
That was what he was thinking. Make himself look innocent. He wanted to comply, be helpful. It wasn't me. I'm in the army. I serve my country. Newborn, baby girl, all that jazz. And the guy, Timothy Hennessy, looked good on paper. And maybe the witnesses were confusing the days. He had been to that house just a couple of days prior. Something. Who knows these things? And
when he drove.
Keith, did you interrupt me? I swear to God. No, please go ahead.
This is important. When he drove to the police station, he actually brought his wife and newborn daughter with him as well. So like visually, he wanted to look innocent as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
not just
exactly.
like, oh, I have a newborn wife. It's like, here they are.
Exactly.
Look
They
at them.
exist,
We're a
please.
happy family. Look.
Yeah. And so when the police, they kept him for over 7 hours questioning him, getting fingerprints, palm prints, saliva, blood. And he was, throughout all of this, nothing but cooperative. And keep in mind, this is 1985. DNA technology, it was starting to come along, but it wasn't really much of a thing. Not nearly like it is today, as you can imagine.
What are you going to do with the samples? Like,
Yeah,
take
exactly.
two vials of saliva. It's like,
Yeah.
well, they look the same.
Exactly.
But
they taste the same?
Do they taste the same? The detective, he did note that even though he was more than cooperative, around midway through, he started realizing that he was still a suspect, and the detective seen his mood was shifting a bit, and he was getting angrier. And as he got this like air of arrogance about him, as if he couldn't be touched. And like he had scored 128 on an Army General Aptitude Test, which that placed him in the 97th percentile. So like he wasn't stupid. He was a smart guy, and he really felt that he could get away with this.
Now, remember there was a witness account and a composite sketch. Well, this witness was a janitor, a fella named Patrick, who started his days early for work. And he told police that around 3:30 a.m. that morning, which was the morning of the 10th of May, he saw a white man in a black members-only jacket carrying a garbage bag leaving the Eastburn's home. The members-only tagline was, when you put it on, something happens, from them old ads. And it sure as shit happens when you put on a members-only jacket.
That's the most vague tagline ever.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty good. It's I don't even know if members-only jackets they're not a thing anymore. I haven't seen one in like 20 years.
I haven't seen it in a while.
Yeah.
But they could be. I don't know. Let us know.
Let us know. Maybe we should get our own members-only jackets.
Oh, yeah.
We can get our names on the back.
Nice.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Something's going to happen.
So Patrick said he seen this guy walking out, and this guy got into a white Chevy, the same vehicle as Tim Hennis's. Now, if that's not, sus enough, police had Patrick come in and pick out a suspect from a lineup while they had Tim Hennis in custody, and Patrick picked out Tim instantly. He said, that's the guy I seen walking out of the house at 3:30 a.m. Zero hesitation. Even with that, Tim was sent home while police, they got out, a warrant for his arrest. Then the police showed up at the Hennis residence that night and arrested him on 3 counts of first-degree murder.
That's like, yeah, you can go home. You can go home, yeah. I'm just kidding. You're arrested. Get back in here.
Psych.
Gotcha.
So, in the investigation to follow, there were some things not quite adding up to support Tim's claims of innocence. For one, the day after the murders, a Friday, Tim had dropped off one single item to the dry cleaners. Guess what it is? What you and I are both licking our chops for, Keith. A black members-only jacket.
Something did happen.
Then his neighbor... Yes, something did happen. Then his neighbors told the police that Tim had poured lighter fluid on some idols in a barrel in the backyard and stoked that baby for 5 whole hours, dropping off items, burning things in his backyard. And then when asked if this was normal behavior for Tim, the neighbors who witnessed him doing this said they had never seen him do anything like that before. He wasn't the kind of guy who just burned shit in his backyard.
Yeah.
Never mind for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Also, magically, Tim had come up with the missing rent money for his landlord. And wouldn't you know it, it just so happened to be $300. the exact sum stolen from the Eastburn home. Tim Hennis already had a run-in with money problems and been known for writing bad checks, in the past. Catherine's ATM card was also used, her ATM card which is missing, it was used twice, and police tracked down an eyewitness to one of the times her ATM card was used, and the witness attested to seeing a blonde white male around the time getting into a light-colored car. So it was not looking good for Tim at all.
No. Yeah, the police, they were convinced it was Hennis. One officer said throughout the investigation, every corner we turned, there was Tim Hennis.
Yeah.
So any lead they followed down was like, and who was it? It was Tim.
It was a white guy with blonde hair, members only jacket, getting into a white jacket.
Is this him? That's him. Okay.
Yeah.
So something's happening.
Yeah.
So a former girlfriend of Hennis, she also told detectives that even after they broke up, he would still drop by her place from time to time. On May 9th, knowing that her husband was stationed in Germany, Hennis, he showed up unannounced. She let him in and they talked for a bit. At one point, she tapped his wedding ring and asked how things were going with his marriage, to which he said, she left me. He was only referring to his wife was visiting her parents. So, technically, she has left me.
Technically, he's not lying.
Yeah, technically, she will be back though.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was hoping for a little something more. She didn't give off any signs and he left shortly after this. This was one of the motives that police had came up with. So they reckoned that this was a boy looking for love in all the wrong places. So that's what they said. So their theory was that after being given the cold shoulder by his ex, he went to the home of Katie Eastburn, who he knew was alone as well. I'm sure they kind of got to chatting, found out that her husband was away.
Was
as
in
well.
Alabama, yeah.
Yeah, and she was alone. So then after she turned him down, he got frustrated and violent and things got way out of control. Again, this is just a theory that they were working on. We don't know exactly what happened, but
Right, yeah, exactly.
sounds good to me.
So in 1985, DNA testing and evidence, it was a far cry from where it is today. They did test the blood at the scene, but it came back inconclusive. So there was zero physical evidence tying him to the actual crime. All the evidence they had was circumstantial. But, I mean,
There's a lot of it.
a metric shit ton of circumstantial evidence. Basically, the Mount Everest size circumstantial evidence. So, Tim, he was already arrested, and the trial against Tim Hennis went ahead on May 27th, 1986, 1 year after the murders. Tim had previously declined a plea deal, stating he refused to accept a deal when he wasn't guilty, and throughout all of this, Tim was pleading his innocence. After all, to even begin all of this, he came forward by himself. Tim's father, a big-time executive at IBM, hired 2 hotshot fucking shit-hot lawyers to defend his son. And during the trial, the prosecution showed 2 days worth of graphic, gory, and horrific crime scene photos of both little girls and their mother. They did this, the prosecution showed such graphic images because they were hoping to get a reaction from Tim, who of course in the courtroom would be forced to look at him. And he had no reaction to witnessing these horrific images of what the prosecution was claiming he had done. Some would say he wasn't reacting because he was guilty. Others would say he just simply didn't know how to react. If he cried, he was guilty. If he didn't cry, he was a cold-blooded monster. The jury would deliberate for just 10 hours and find Tim Hennis guilty on all counts. That's 3 counts of first-degree murder for a mother and her 2 young girls. Tim Hennis was sentenced to death.
Yeah, at the time, not even his own lawyers believed that he was innocent. One of them later said that he thought that he was guilty as all hell, and he didn't particularly care for Tim either. But as a defense lawyer, it was his job just to represent him getting the best deal. But
of course,
yeah, he didn't like him at the time at all.
Yeah. So, story over? Yeah. Not even close. Get a load of this, right? Tim sitting on death row. 2 months after the trial is over, Tim Hennis gets a little a handwritten letter that was post-date July 8th, 1986. And this letter Tim received while sitting on death row read as, I quote, "Dear Tim Hennis, I did the crime. I murdered the Eastburns. Sorry you're doing the time. I'll be safely out of North Carolina when you read this. Thanks, Mr. X." There you go. Alrighty then. We have the guilty man. It's Mr. X.
Mr. X.
Yeah. Amazing that this Mr. X character would admit it. Now, I must say, unfortunately, Mr. X has never been identified, found, or there's never really been any indication as to even a hint, a little titty-titch of a hint or a guess as to who this mystery Mr. X is.
Probably his wife.
It probably was his wife. So regardless, though, an appeal was approved due to the defense's claim that the jury sat through grueling crime scene photos that unjustifiably pinned the jurors against Tim. He would have his retrial, and crime scene photos would be limited in Tim Hennis's trial number 2. He spent 2 years on death row until his conviction was overturned, and his new trial began in February of 1989. With no physical evidence, still, the defense team this time poked every hole in every circumstantial evidence piece and shrouded doubt to every witness statement as they can. It's the only thing they can do. Remember, Patrick Cohn, the janitor, who previously said he had seen Tim leave the Eastburn's residence in the early morning hours, well, he wasn't reliable that much at all, and his testimony was sort of all over the place. The defense even brought in a meteorologist and helicopter pilot to contradict Patrick's clear and starry night weather report. That night, around 3:30 a.m., when Patrick said he saw Tim Hennis, it was actually extremely dark and foggy that morning. A helicopter pilot even confirmed he had to cancel a flight because of the weather. Therefore, how could Patrick be so sure it was Tim? He could barely see him. They even discredited the witness who saw someone using Catherine Eastburn's ATM card, saying that this witness, they used their own ATM card 3 minutes after this mysterious person did. Basically saying there was no way to credibly say that this individual was the one who used the machine before the witness did. They even set a timer and the court and jurors sat in silence for 3 minutes just to prove 3 minutes is actually a hell of a long time, enough time for this user to be gone. Therefore, there must have been quite a gap between the witness and this mysterious ATM user. 3 minutes is a long time. How can you be so sure who that was? And lastly, they brought forward a neighbor who walked in the early morning hours often, who was 6'4" also, wore a black members only jacket, and was blonde with a mustache. Reports went so far as stating this neighbor of the Eastburns could have been Tim's twin. When this guy walked into the courtroom, the court gasped at the similarities between himself and the defendant.
This was like the bombshell of their case. Also,
that's the real killer.
I know,
there.
right? I was about to say, maybe you should have they investigated him.
Yeah. So, there was it. With no physical evidence and enough doubt successfully casted on his guilt, Timothy Hennis was freed. He was acquitted on all counts, free to live his life, be reunited with his wife, and watch his daughter grow up. He'd already missed out on a couple of years of his precious young daughter's life. She was now 4 years old by the time he was freed.
And then just like this case, it became textbook example of how prosecutors could manipulate the jury. Prosecution, they set up a massive screen that covered the entire wall of the courtroom, projecting, as you said, graphic images one after the other. Many of these were autopsy photos of Cara, age 5, and Aaron, age 3. In the closing argument, the defense even said, "There is your baby killer. He's the one responsible for the deaths of these kids and their mother. The man responsible for taking their lives is sitting in this courtroom breathing the same air as you. And hopefully it won't be for much longer." So they were going for him, like, but as I said, like, this is all textbook, and it was like there was books wrote about it and stuff. So
yeah. I mean, that sounds very. It sounds a very weird thing to say for the prosecution to say, like, hopefully he won't be breathing much longer. It's
they
like,
went in.
Okay, calm down.
They
You're
went in
still
hard.
supposed to be like members of the Justice Department or whatever.
Right,
like,
yeah.
You're supposed to still be
Cool the jets, bud.
Cool, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's for me to say as a biased observer. Who I can say that. You can't say that. So there you go. That was it.
There we go. Yeah, end of story.
Oh, nah. That's not the end of the story. So Tim, he after being freed, he was allowed to rejoin the army, and he earned over the years one hell of a reputation. He was a well-liked man, moved up the ranks of the military, all that jazz. His wife, Angela, and himself, they went on to add to their little family. They had a son, Timmy Boy. He earned several awards and accolades during his time with the military. He did deployments in Iraq, Somalia, before retiring in 2004 and settling in with his family, all four, in Fort Lewis, Washington. A happy ending for a military veteran who had horrific allegations set against him, even spending time on death row, which is pretty insane. It's pretty insane to have spent time on death row. It's like, the old Columbo. One more thing, though. And let the record show I'm pointing the pointer, wagging the pointer.
One more thing.
Yes. See, funny thing is that Gary Eastburn and his last surviving daughter, Jana, they had relocated to London eventually, after things calmed down after the rest of the family was horrifically slain. Gary remarried and he eventually retired from the Air Force. And when he did, him and his new family, they settled down in 1998. And guess where they settled down? The state of Washington. Now, not exactly the same place as Fort Lewis, where Timothy Hennis was now living, but only 15 miles away from it. Gary and Catherine's surviving daughter, Jana, she lived in fear, dreading she may run into her family's murderer. They believed it. They never once doubted that Tim Hennis didn't kill their family. They were full sure he had, gotten off scot-free. But they believed he did it. And then guess what?
What?
Something happened. In 2006, something extraordinary, not just ordinary, Keith, extra.
Okay.
Ordinary happened.
Something happened.
Technology advanced. It does that. Do you know? Are you aware technology gets a little bit better?
I've heard.
It's rumored, but it's true, folks.
Okay.
Believe me.
You heard it here first.
Yes, you did. Folks, you give us credit, please. Cold cases were being reopened and reinvestigated. Killers were getting caught. And, who murdered the Eastburn case? It was unsolved. Nobody knew who did it. They thought they had who did it, but he was innocent. So who truly murdered Catherine and her two daughters? Well, in 1985, if you remember, police had collected fingernail clippings, hair, and even done a DNA kit on Catherine, in hopes that one day this would see the light, of day. Technology would get enough that this would be usable. And if you also remember, Tim had willingly given his DNA at the time of the initial investigation. Well, it was long awaited, but a detective found this evidence while going through cases to re-examine, and they sent this kit off for testing. And what happened next? Straight out of fiction, if you can believe it. The DNA matched with none other than Timothy motherfucking Hennis. Shocking. The numbers were like 1.3 quadrillion likelihood it was Tim's DNA found on Catherine Eastburn's body. So, what to do? He'd already been tried and acquitted of these murders, and there's this little thing called double jeopardy. You cannot be retried for the same crime. You can't go on trial for the same crime. We spoke about this once before with Mel Ignatow.
Yes,
many moons ago. In fact, that was kind of our impetus for wanting to cover this one. Because I think we referenced this case
mentioned it,
in the Mel Ignatow one, and we were like, oh, we should do this someday. And here we are. Look at us now. So they couldn't try Tim Hennis again for the murders of the three Eastburns. But guess what? There was a little bit of a loophole that had never actually been tested before, but it was pretty interesting. Military members, serving military members, can be court-martialed, so they can be tried in a military court, which is, different to a civilian court. And they can be tried in a military court even after they've been tried and acquitted in a civilian court. Two, different systems. Very completely separate to a civilian court. The thing is, though, to, be court-martialed, they have to be active members. So, get this, police worked with the commanding officer at Fort Bragg and requested Tim come out of retirement. With one more job, that kind of thing. We got to bring him out of retirement.
I'm getting too over this shit.
Yeah. They just wanted him to come out of retirement so they could charge him with the murders. They essentially tricked Tim Hennis into rejoining the military so they could charge him. And so, September 26th, 2006, Tim back on military duty. He'd been on military duty for a year. He was officially charged on 3 counts of premeditated murder based on the new DNA evidence. Tim, grasping at straws, tried to appeal 3 separate times in 3 different court districts, all dismissed. His third trial for murder would begin March 2010.
Yeah, the defense, they attempted to postpone the trial due to this major scandal that had erupted earlier that year involving the North Carolina SBI forensic lab.
Which was the lab that tested the DNA?
This is the same lab that confirmed the DNA match with Hennis's case, yes. So this is actually, this is really interesting. So because this scandal opened up like some conspiracies as well towards this case.
Okay.
So this scandal, it started with a man named Greg Taylor. He was a man who was wrongfully convicted of murder, and he'd spent 17 years in prison, and he was released in February 2010, so a month just before this case with Tim Hennis. Interestingly as well, Taylor, he actually became the first person in the US legal system to be declared innocent by a court rather than just not guilty, which is usually the standard ruling in such cases.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Taylor's exoneration came after it was revealed that the SBI crime lab had withheld crucial evidence that would have cleared him from the very beginning.
Oh, okay.
So during Taylor's hearing, SBI analyst Dwayne Deaver, he admitted that, and this is a quote, holding back such blood tests, those that might exonerate defendants, was official SBI policy.
Wait, what? It was official... Sorry, SBI? What's that stand for?
So SBI stands for State Bureau of Investigation.
Okay, so, and it was their policy to withhold evidence.
So that's what he was saying.
Okay.
Basically, this revelation, it led to a massive audit.
They would get all the evidence, and then the detectives just go, we think it's this guy. And then they would just be like, okay, we're only going to test what we know will, find him guilty, essentially.
He was saying something along the lines of because they do multiple tests on blood, and they were just going off the first sample.
Okay.
So he was like, we send the first sample blood through, and that was positive. Then the next was like false, but it was like, we've already sent through the first one. We're going to go with that.
Yeah.
Again, like this is like, I think it's a lot more kind of his policy. He was saying it was their policy. But
Yeah.
Anyway, but it came to this huge audit. And uncovering that the SBI, they'd misrepresented evidence in more than 200 criminal cases.
200?
Yeah.
Wow.
So between 1987 and 2003, Deaver, he was actually personally involved in 34 of them over his 25-year career.
Wow.
Now, if Dwayne Deaver's name sounds a little bit familiar, it may be because he also played a major role in the Netflix documentary The Staircase. So in that case, Michael Peterson, he was convicted of murdering his wife Kathleen and was granted a new trial after Deaver, who had testified as a blood spatter expert, was discredited, calling his testimony into question. That's part of this whole thing, this whole scandal.
Yeah.
But Deaver, he wasn't the only one in the SBI to botch up this evidence. So in a separate 2004 capital murder case, another analyst made a grave error. They swapped blood samples of a victim and the suspect.
Oh.
Yeah, so
he killed himself.
It was a mother and daughter. So the daughter was being convicted of killing her mother, and there was blood spatter on the wall, and when they tested it, they said that it was the daughter's, but the blood spatter was actually the mother's. It was the victim.
Yeah.
So it was all the victim's blood.
Yeah.
But the Innocent Project, they actually got involved, stating that the North Carolina SBI Forensic Lab operates as the prosecution's lab, not the justice system's lab.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, so this criticism stems from the fact that the state crime lab is controlled by a law enforcement agency, raising concerns about potential bias.
Of course, it's basically just a weapon to be used against people rather than for people.
Exactly, yeah. Like the concern is that analysts, they may feel pressured to present evidence in a way that favours the police and the prosecution. Also, I guess the evidence that they're given by police already kind of comes to them with a story that they're trying to just confirm their story.
Sounds like it's just all confirmation bias and just all good old boys, helping each other out to basically just wrap up loose ends as easily as possible.
Exactly, they're all part of the same agency, all towards the same one goal, when you should have someone that's completely unbiased.
Exactly.
Like on the other hand, though, some argue that removing the lab from law enforcement control could hinder its ability to access critical law enforcement data. They also claim that there's policies in place to prevent this bias, like strict evidence handling rules and peer reviews, but like after these
doesn't sound like it.
I know, right? Yeah, like after these past scandals, a lot of people are now questioning whether these safeguards they really work or not. Anyway, back to Tim Hennis. So when the defense requested to postpone the trial due to this huge and major scandal, the judge said no. Now, this was actually sort of good news for the defense, because they could now attempt to undermine the credibility of the forensic evidence during the trial. However, the prosecution found a second smear from the rape kit, and they sent it to the US Army Criminal Investigation Labs, because this is all now happening within
the military.
So they sent it to their own lab, so not an independent, but separate from that lab with all the things. And they confirmed that it was indeed Hennis.
Right, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so the trial continued. So it was... Yeah, so it was like they had the test as part of this huge scandal, and they're like, oh, this is incredible. It's like, grand, we'll send it off somewhere else. And you're like, oh no, it isn't.
Wait, I'll take a note. So during his 3-week trial, front and center, the most damning piece of evidence against him was the DNA, with previous evidence as just extra proof. The defense tried to say that the footprints, blood and hair did not match him, which was true. There was unidentified DNA found in the home, but that certainly doesn't mean Tim didn't do it. I mean, his semen was found inside Catherine, and he had previously denied, having any sexual relations with her, saying he didn't know her other than meeting her to pick up the dog. But then he would, of course, change his story and say, "Oh no, wait, I just remembered. I forgot. Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, we did actually have consensual sex. This damn mind of mine, forgot about that part." Which was something, of course, he never mentioned until they could say they found his DNA.
Yeah.
Well, Tim was convicted in April 2010 and sentenced to death again. Also, it should be noted, he was, of course, demoted from military strippers' pay and dishonorably discharged. But, duh. And this time, the appeals went nowhere. Tim Hennis still is in prison on death row to this very day. Now, the last military execution was back in 1961, so it's kind of safe to say that Tim may never actually be executed for his crimes, and he has been busy requesting appeals and trying to find any nook and cranny for a retrial or acquittal. His last one was in 2020, and all of his appeals, they've obviously been denied. In all likelihood, Timothy Hennis will stay on death row for the rest of his natural-born life. Gary Eastburn has stated that he's happy enough with that, but if he ever were to be executed, it would be well deserved. Mm-hmm. And that is the story of Tim Hennis, the guy who did do it, then he didn't do it, but he did do it.
But then he did it, yeah.
Yeah, it's wild.
It's a crazy story. It's actually very similar to, have you ever heard of Jeffrey or MacDonald?
The name sounds, I haven't covered him.
Okay, so MacDonald is also a former US Army physician. Well, sorry, not also, but he was in the US Army.
Yeah.
He was convicted of murdering his pregnant wife Colette and her 2 daughters, 5-year-old Kimberly and 2-year-old Kristen, with an ice pick and a knife in 1970 at their home in, get this, Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Wow, murder capital of the world,
Hey,
or at
where is
least,
that?
if we're just saying the world, it's these 2 cases.
So MacDonald, he had maintained his innocence and argued that drug-crazed hippies had invaded his home.
Classic.
This is his quote of what they were saying when they were invading the home. "Acid is groovy and kill the pigs." I feel like he was getting it all from what he's seen on TV.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Man, I'm so high. Goddamn hippie! Whoa!
And they apparently said all this before slaughtering the family. When military police arrived at the crime scene, they also found the word pig scrawled in blood on the headboard in the master bedroom.
Of course.
Though the army, they initially brought charges against MacDonald, they were dropped. Years later, he was arrested, charged, and convicted in federal court. For that murder.
It's almost like the opposite of this
Yeah,
case.
but how wild is that? Like Fort Bragg, like it is one of the largest military installations in the world. Like I think at the time it had around 50,000 military personnel.
Wow.
But even so, what are the chances within a span of 15 years you would have 2 members of the US Army violently kill a family, including kids, and then be bounced around from federal to military court?
That's crazy.
Isn't
It's
it?
pretty interesting.
That's a small world.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
small indeed.
Small world, man.
Small world. All right. Thank you so much for listening, folks. I hope you enjoyed this whole episode of the That Chapter podcast. Ooh, what are we going to be talking about next week? I don't know.
Something's going to happen.
Something's good. Yeah, hey, listen, it's okay. We gotta get our jackets, man. All right, folks. As always, please check out the rate and reviews of the That Chapter podcast. You can find it's That Chapter podcast free and available on all podcast platforms. Rate and review if you can. And new episode out every Monday morning, and videos are out on every Tuesday on the main That Chapter channel. Keith is not on the. Maybe you'll appear someday in the main videos.
Who knows?
Say hello.
Just pop in. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Get out. All right, thanks, guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Members only when you put it on, something happens.